Welcome to Animal Rights, the Abolitionist Approach Commentary. I'm Gary Francione. This is our seventh No Frills, No Bells, No Whistles commentary, dealing with issues of animal ethics, the abolition of animal exploitation, the failure of animal welfare reform, the importance of ethical veganism as a moral baseline, the importance of creative, nonviolent vegan education as a primary form of animal activism, and the general importance of the principle of nonviolence. In this commentary, I want to discuss with you an event that happened to Anna and me on Saturday evening. It was a very upsetting event, but I think I drew some lessons from it, and I would like to share them with you and share the event with you. We were driving home, and as we got close to the street where we live, we saw that there were some vehicles parked off to the side with their lights flashing, and we pulled our car up, and we saw that there was a deer had been hit, and she was off on the side of the road, and so we pulled the car over, and we got out and approached the situation, and I asked whether any of there were 5 people there. There was a couple, a man and a woman, and then a father and 2 teenage sons. And I asked if any of them had hit the deer, and they said no, she had been there when the man and woman, who apparently were the first to see her, came on the scene and pulled over, and then the other 3 came, and there was a discussion. They were talking about how horrible it is that someone would hit a deer and leave her in this way and not do anything. It's obviously that she's suffering, that she's injured, and just leave her and not do anything, not even stop or attempt to do anything. And they were talking about how horrible this was, and then we all and the man from the couple was on the ground sitting next to the deer, and he had his arm around her, and he was petting her neck, and he was talking to her softly, and he was obviously very concerned. He felt, he was expressing emotional concern. It was clear. And nobody was joking. I mean, they were all talking about how seriously the deer was injured and what should be done. And I said, well, I think we should probably call the police. And the father of the 2 teenage kids said, well, yeah, but if you do that, the police will just come and shoot the deer. And I said, well, I'm not really sure that there's an alternative in this situation, because it appears to me as though she's not going to get up and scamper away. She's bleeding from both her mouth and her anus. She has, in all probability, serious internal injuries, and it looks to me like her back legs, at least one of them, looks broken to me. And there's really not an alternative, because under state law, veterinarians are not permitted to treat animals that come under the jurisdiction of the Game Commission, and so we couldn't take this deer to an emergency veterinarian anyway, because they couldn't legally treat her. So one of the men who was there said, well, I have a knife in my truck. And I said, well, no, why don't we just call the police, because I've dealt with these situations before, with deer car collisions, and people leave injured deer in the road, and I have called the police, and they've been pretty good about coming out fairly quickly, and they shoot the deer, and it's very unpleasant, and I wish it didn't have to happen, but I don't really know what else we can do in this situation. And so people seemed pretty concerned and upset, but the consensus was that yes, I should call the police and have the police come and shoot the deer. And so I did. I called 911, and I asked for a police car to be dispatched, and the operator said that would be done. I got off the phone, and we were all continuing to surround the deer, and someone, and I don't remember who it was, I think it was one of the younger kids. They were 18, 19 years old, and one of them said, "It's a real shame because somebody should really eat this deer." And I thought at first he was. I thought at first he was just making a very bad joke, and the moment he said that, everybody sort of chimed in and said, except Ann and me, chimed in and said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. It's a shame to waste the deer. Somebody ought to eat it." Now, interestingly, up until this point, before we started talking about her as food, the words that were being used were she and her to describe the deer. And now the discussion had shifted to this deer being food. She became an it. And they all began to talk in a very animated way about, yes, hunting season was just about to start and how great hunting season was last year, and it would be great to have some venison before the season started. And do you think that the police officer would let them take the deer, and after he shot the deer, could they take it home and eat it? And obviously, Anna and I were a bit taken aback by the situation, to say the very least. And I said, "So you are all hunters?" And they said, "Yeah, we're archery hunters." And you obviously know what that means. They use a bow and arrow. And yes, we're archery hunters. And they said, "Do you hunt?" And I said, "No, actually, I don't." And then one of the young men who was there, I think he immediately perceived the fact that I was not a hunter as meaning that I was critical of hunting, which of course I am. But he said, "Well, you may not be a hunter, but our hunting these animals really is no different from your going down to the store and buying them. In fact, the deer have a better life than the animals that you eat, that you buy down at the supermarket." And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. He was ready for it. The moment I announced I wasn't a hunter, he was expecting me to be critical of hunting, but he wasn't expecting that I was going to be vegan. And so he immediately pointed out, quite correctly, that most deer have a better life than most of the animals that we purchase in the supermarket, even at Whole Foods or at any one of the Happy Meat supermarkets. That the deer have a better life than the happiest of the Happy Meat that the large animal welfare groups tell us is a really great moral alternative. And so he was ready for that. He was ready. He was ready to address that issue. And I said, "Well, I said I don't eat animals at all." And interestingly, nobody. It's not that I was. It's not that they all started joking or calling me names or being abusive in any way. As a matter of fact, they indicated that they were understanding of that position. They said, "Oh, okay." And then I said to them, I said, "Let me ask you this: as somebody who doesn't hunt and eat animals, and who finds it very troubling." Finds all of this very troubling. When you guys go out and shoot deer with bow and arrow, you obviously don't kill them immediately. And how do you feel about that? And the man who was sitting on the ground, who was petting the deer, and he was still petting the deer, he said he took his other hand and he said, "Well," he said, "this is where I try to hit them. I try to hit them in this area, this lung area, because if you hit them in the lungs, they go down pretty quickly. and then everybody was chiming in saying yes, that's the way to do it, and one of the younger men said, oh well, last year was my first year, and I shot the deer, and the deer went down almost immediately, and if you do it carefully, it's but everybody acknowledged that there are a lot of deer who get shot in places in which they don't drop, in which they're able to run off, and then they die in lingering situations. We discussed that, and it was fascinating to me that we were having this discussion while this deer is alive, while this guy is sitting on the ground petting the deer, and while all five of them, none of the five of them stopped to eat this deer. None of the five of them were thinking about that until the discussion developed. They were there because they saw an injured deer at the side of the road, and they weren't exactly sure what to do about it, and that they were concerned and they were outraged that someone would hit this deer and would leave the deer at the side of the road. And then the police did come. The deer was killed, and the father and two sons took the deer off to their house and I guess butchered, and have probably already started eating her. In any event, it was a very interesting experience. It was a horrible experience, obviously, and it was tragic. It was one of those things where after it's over with and you go home, you just sort of sit quietly and you don't say much because it was profoundly upsetting. But and I wasn't yesterday able to actually do the podcast. I tried to do the podcast, and I really wasn't able to. I was still pretty upset about what had happened the night before, and I still am. But I want to share with you a couple of thoughts. One is, this whole incident indicates what I'm talking about when I say we are a society in which the delusion and the confusion about how we think about our relationship to non-humans is so incredibly deep. It is so pervasive that to try to compare speciesism, I can compare it morally with other forms of discrimination, but as a sociological matter, to try to compare it to other institutions like human slavery, where there was a lot of opposition and there was a lot of awareness. I mean, human slavery was always a very controversial situation. Or when people talk about the Holocaust, which was an event that was organized, it was a top-down event, it was organized by a relatively small number of people. Obviously, there had to be people who were complicit in it, but nevertheless, it wasn't something that was consumer-driven. It wasn't a demand-driven phenomenon, and there were a lot of people who were opposed to it. In our society, the consumption of animals for food is pervasive. People don't even think about it. Indeed, here we have 5 people stopping. And they stop because they see an injured animal and they're concerned. And they're morally outraged that somebody could leave this poor animal on the side of the road. And they're there, and the guy's there on the ground, and he's getting blood all over himself while he's petting this deer, and he's talking to her, and he's trying to calm her, and it was clear that there was a great deal of confusion here. Also interesting that when they stopped and when they were talking about her and when we were having our initial discussions about her, it was a she, not an it. The word was she, not it. The moment that we started talking about her as food, then she became an it. And that was very interesting because it showed that there had to be a shift. That while they were dealing with her as another sentient being in need, She was a she. And that when they started thinking about her as food, they needed a linguistic shift that helped them make sense of that. And it was interesting because after the first mention of eating her, then they all used it for the rest of the time after that, because they were talking about hunting, and they were talking about eating her. They were talking about hunting generally. And so we were no longer talking about sentient beings that we have any sort of relationship with. We were talking about the other. We were otherizing her and all of her companions that we're going to start killing in a few weeks when hunting season starts. So the language shifted to otherizing her. It was also interesting that the moment I said I wasn't a hunter, their initial response, or at least that of the kid who had responded to me, was, yeah, well, but before you criticize us because you're not a hunter, keep in mind that what you're doing is really no better than what we're doing. Indeed, by eating animals that have at least been running around for a little while before we pump arrows into their lungs or whatever we do with them, they've had a better life than the intensively farmed animals, including the happy meat animals that you buy at the grocery store. And it was interesting that's his immediate thought. And what resonated in me was, I used to go to a lot of anti-hunting rallies. I used to be invited to speak at them. And the last one I went to, I remember it very, very clearly. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I went to an anti-hunting rally, and there was a television station there, and they interviewed me after I gave my talk about the situation and why the hunt was a bad idea. And she said, "You have a secret agenda, though, don't you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "You're opposed to this hunt." And she said, but you're also, why don't you just come out and say it? You're opposed to people eating meat altogether, aren't you? And that's really what the agenda is, isn't it? And I said, actually, I would take it further than that. I said, I'm opposed to people eating any animal products, whether it's meat or eggs or dairy or wearing wool or leather, things like that. Yes, I said, it's not a secret, absolutely not a secret. And I said, I thought I even made some references to that when I was giving my talk a few minutes ago. And so I chatted with her for a few more minutes, and then I was reprimanded by the animal people who had organized the demonstration, because they said, "Why did you have to say that? Why couldn't you just say we were opposed to the hunt?" And I said, because first of all, that wouldn't be honest. And secondly, do you think people are really that stupid? Because if you do, you're wrong. Because someone who is sitting there watching TV and watching a hunting demonstration against a hunt is going to say, really, but what's the difference between hunting animals? Maybe I wouldn't want to do it myself, but what's the difference? These guys are eating these animals. So what's the difference? I eat animals. I go to the store. I buy them. It would be hypocritical of me to oppose what they're doing. Most people can really see the connection. And most people, if they think about it, will come to the same conclusion that kid came to on Saturday night. That the animals that these people are hunting are probably leading a better life, on the whole, in most cases, than the happiest of the happy meat, the deliriously happy meat that is being sold by whoever is getting the labels that they're getting from all of the large animal welfare groups in this country. And so I think it's important to to see the complexity here. And you know, on Saturday night, we were dealing with 5 people, 5 other human beings, and this poor little deer. But I'm talking about the human animals right now. You can call them what you want them because they're hunters. Well, what you want to call them because they're hunters. You can refer to them as, you know, with all the names that sometimes people seem to be able to use without much hesitation. You can call them moral monsters or Nazis or whatever you want to call them. But you know what? They were 5 human beings who stopped because they saw an injured animal and they were concerned. And they were concerned about her. And they were concerned about whether she was going to get up and run off or whether she wasn't going to get up and run off. They were concerned about her. Then they started thinking about eating her, and she became something different. She stopped being someone, she started being something. But it was very, very interesting how the paradigm had to shift in their heads from her being a sentient being that needed help to being food, to being something they ate, something that in a couple weeks they would be going into the woods and killing. They had to otherize her. And what I'm suggesting is, are you ever going to be able to educate all those folks and get them, get them to sort of see the a different way of looking at things and getting them to embrace veganism? The answer is no. But you know what? A lot of them could be educated. And I was dealing with 5 people who were not moral monsters. And if I wasn't in that situation, which was not the best situation to have a theoretical discussion in, I'm sure that certainly with respect to the guy who was sitting on the ground, sitting in the blood, in the puddle of blood, petting this deer, do I think I could get him to see it a little differently? I have no doubt of it. And I'm hoping that I see him again soon. Maybe I'll run into him in the supermarket, or maybe I will see him someplace else. And I'm hoping that I have a chance to sit down with him, because I am convinced that that's exactly the sort of person who could benefit from creative, nonviolent vegan education. Somebody sitting down and saying to him, I don't want to talk about the fact that I think, his exposure to the animal rights movement, I'm sure, has been up to this point people screaming at him about what a horrible person he is. And he doesn't even understand why he's a horrible person. Because he says, hey, what the hell's the difference between what I'm doing and what everybody else is doing? He's probably been yelled at by animal people who aren't even vegan. Which is really ironic, isn't it? You have people who, not even vegans, who are participating directly in animal exploitation, running around lecturing people about participating in animal exploitation. So he's probably never had a discussion with somebody who hasn't already prejudged him morally as a moral monster, and who wants to explore what his different feelings were and to explore the inconsistencies that he demonstrated very, very clearly on Saturday night. They all did, as far as I was concerned, but this guy in particular. They all did, but this guy in particular. We need to educate people. We have failed to educate people. We need to understand that animal exploitation is pervasive in this culture. It is considered the normal, default thing to do. That's why I keep saying, attacking the supplier makes no sense whatsoever. The suppliers wouldn't be doing what they're doing if we were not demanding animal products. We're the source of the demand. The politicians would not be favoring animal industries if we didn't allow it to happen. But the real problem is our demand. We need to be educating people. We can educate people. Saturday night was an example. It was a really up close and personal experience with moral schizophrenia. And it really showed me something. It reinforced something that I know because I deal with students all the time who are hunters, or who are people who have never thought about this issue and come into our class thinking that this is going to be an opportunity for them to win arguments, because obviously there can't be any compelling argument in favor of our not exploiting animals, and they come out being vegans, a lot of them. But I am convinced that many people care about this issue, but they don't know how to care about this issue, and they don't understand what caring means in this context. They don't see their own inconsistencies. That's what creative, nonviolent vegan education is all about. Thank you for listening. If you're not vegan, go vegan. It's easy, it's better for you, it's better for the planet, and most importantly, it's the morally right thing to do. And also remember that if animal rights means anything, it means peace, it means nonviolence. The problem is violence. Violence is going to be no part of the solution. Thanks again for listening. Join us over at abolitionistapproach.com.